right, we are going to be continuing in our series through the whole Bible. And today we are actually going to be talking about one of my favorite books of all time. It is the book of Leviticus. And I'm not being ironic when I say that Leviticus is actually one of my favorite books of the Bible. I think there's like something naturally in me that likes a challenge. And so, Philippians, it's like there's some good vibes in Philippians, but there's definitely something about Leviticus that hits different. And so, in order to get into the book of Leviticus, I think we need to actually, I think the reason that a lot of us miss what's going on in the book of Leviticus is because we don't put ourselves in the shoes of the people to whom the book of Leviticus was addressed. You have to think literally millennia before Jesus in order for this book to make sense, which is why I actually think it's really powerful, but it's really challenging at the same time. And so first, what we need to do is we need to get into the mindset of a 2000 BC Canaanite. I would argue that if you put yourself in the shoes of a Canaanite person 2,000 years before Jesus, you would find that Leviticus makes a lot of sense. And in order to make sense of Leviticus, we need to make sense of the religions around at the time. And so if you're a Canaanite, life is very different. For us, when we want to get food, where do we go? The store. And then we put that food in our fridge, where it's still good for weeks at a time, right? If you are, even if it is after the agricultural revolution, when you have food, it's subject to rot much more quickly. And so the idea of storing food for really long amounts of time, this is problematic. Also, whenever you want water, what do you do in your house? You turn on the faucet. But if you are an ancient Near Eastern person, where do you get water from? There's streams, there's underground thing, but all of those things are fed by the rain. And what this means is that you live in a world where you are subject to all sorts of forces. For some reason, when you leave your grain in this pot for too long, the grain starts going bad. For some reason, if the sky does not drip down that miraculous stuff from heaven, then your crops don't grow. If you don't have enough food, if you don't have enough water, then the child that you are raising does not survive. And so the ancient Canaanite person looks at their world and they're like, man, everything is so wildly out of my control. I'm subject to all these forces. And you'll notice that in a lot of the ancient literature, there is an assumption that the rain, that the crops, that the ground, that the wild animals, that even the life that comes from within a mother and a father is subject to these other forces that are actually pulling the strings. And those other forces, they called the gods. That there was a god of the rain, there was a god of the clouds, there was a god of fertility, there's a god of crops, there's a god of woodland animals, there's a god of basically every little subdivision of life. And so if you are an ancient Canaanite person and you're not sure if it's going to rain enough for you to be able to eat that season, who do you call out to? You call out to the gods. And here's the thing about the gods is, when you open up the book of Leviticus, you discover that it starts talking a lot about things like sacrifice, like animal sacrifices, grain sacrifices, peace offerings, all of these types of things. But the book of Leviticus is not the book that invented these things. These things predate the book of Leviticus literally by at least 1,000 years. Because humanity had this intuition that if I can't control the rain, if I can't control, when my baby is born, whether or not that baby starts breathing or not, if I can't control whether or not my food will stay good long enough, if I can actually survive, if I will be successful in trying to survive on this rough planet, well, I need to cry out to the gods somehow. And so one of the things that people did is they invented these things called altars. Now, I think a lot of times we have this picture of what the altar looks like based off of when you Google image altar, there's church pictures, there's 3D renderings of what the biblical holy temple altar used to look like. But this right here is what the ancient altar looked like. A pile of rocks and some wood. And on that altar, what you would do is you would bring something precious to you. Because if these gods, sometimes they're happy and sometimes they're not, well, we need to keep them happy. And so what you would do is you would bring something precious and you would burn it on the altar. And the smoke and the fragrance of this thing would rise up to the heavens, wherever that mysterious place that all the gods are. And then maybe they would do a favor for you. Maybe they would send rain. Maybe they would let your crops grow really well. As the smoke arises, that smell, maybe they would like it. Maybe they would be satisfied by this thing. Now, what happened with the altar, though, is that it became sort of a black hole. It became a vortex for ancient people. Because here's what happens. If the gods send you rain, and you get the rain, well then, it must be because you gave sacrifices. And so next time, you need to make sure, if you want to keep that God happy, at least bring as much sacrifice as you got that last time. And so you bring more sacrifices to the altar to keep that God happy. Or let's say you did sacrifices, but you did not get rain. So then there's something in you that's like, maybe I did not give enough. And so guess what you do next time? You bring more to the altar. Each of these ancient gods and the people who worship these ancient gods, the altar became a place where more and more and more was demanded. You see this in the way that these gods were worshipped. For example, we have Asherah. Asherah is the goddess of fertility in the Canaanite religion. Asherah was in charge of making sure that Baal and El, these two gods, got along. She was like the mom that mitigated the damage between like two violent boys. And Asherah, her job in doing so was to make sure that the storm god Baal was happy and the overarching god El was happy. And in the process, she watched out to make sure that your babies stayed alive. And so you'll notice that even as you read through the Old Testament, there are time and time again where the Israelites themselves put up poles to worship Asherah and made sacrifices to Asherah and worshiped Asherah instead of worshiping God, because if they wanted to protect the most sacred thing in their lives, that if they wanted to make sure that their children stayed alive, well, you have to worship Asherah and bring offerings to keep her happy. Now, Asherah is actually pretty tame. You had to do some like pretty wild stuff to worship her. But if you look through the archaeological data, there are Asherim, like little tiny Asherah goddesses that are even found in Israelite homes dating back to 900 BC. So this goddess was worshipped by the people of God. So if you're ever wondering, like, were they always faithful to God? No, is the short answer. Another god that I don't know if you've heard of before, but this god's name is Moloch. Everybody say Moloch. Moloch is a compound word. Some people think that this word was invented as a combination of melech, which means king, good, and maybe taking the nouns of bosheth, which means shame. Because the Israelites think that worshiping this god was the greatest of shames, which is why the Hebrew name became Moloch. Moloch became the stand-in for Baal, the storm god. And when you bring more, let's say that you're a grain farmer and you bring grain. Maybe that's not good enough for Moloch. And then you're like, okay, how about a sheep? I can give you a sheep because even though that'll feed my family for weeks, here is a sheep, Moloch. But if Moloch is still not happy and you don't get the rains, well then maybe you bring a bull, something that can feed an entire village with a meal. And maybe if Moloch still is not happy, you escalate more. And if you're already like giving him the most food, the most grain, the most animals, well, guess what Moloch began to demand? Moloch demanded your children. If you wanted to keep Moloch happy, people would bring their own babies and burn their babies on the altar to Moloch in order to receive favor from him. In fact, in a lot of the graven images of this god, he actually has like a bull head, and he has a bronze bowl that he's holding out because they would light flames under the bronze bowl and throw their infants once the bronze bowl was heated so that they could kill their babies in sacrifice to Moloch. Now you might be like, that's wild, why would people do that? But if you live in a world where all you want is security and peace and you're gonna starve anyway, what else could you do but be like, maybe Moloch will be happy if I just give him my kid. Maybe Moloch will be happy if I give him everything that's valuable and precious to me. And Moloch wasn't the only god that did this type of thing. There is, if you look in the Ugaritic temple writings, you find Chemosh. Everybody say Chemosh. It's probably Chemosh, but it's fine. But it was the god of war. And similarly, if you want blessings when you're going out into battle where you're theoretically going to be killing some people, well, guess what Chemosh began requiring? Human sacrifice. You see, the altar became this vortex where more and more and more was demanded. Now, the Israelites, out of the book of Leviticus, yes, they are going to the land of Canaan, and then way in ancient history, they were in the land of Canaan. But before that, where were the Israelites prior to the book of Leviticus? Say it out loud. Egypt. Good. And there was this guy in Egypt. His name was Pharaoh. He was kind of a big deal. He was the boss. Now, not only was he the boss, because I think sometimes we're like, cool, he was the figurehead, and as the figurehead, he's like the king or the president, but Pharaoh was more than that. In the Egyptian pantheon back then, Pharaoh had God status. It was Pharaoh's job to be like Asherah and be the one who kept the peace between the gods so that the balance of the universe would stay in check. See, if you keep Pharaoh happy, you keep the gods happy. And if you keep the gods happy, well then maybe you'll have something to eat. Maybe you can continue to survive if you keep Pharaoh happy. All of this is the context from which Leviticus arises. That there are these assumptions that you have to keep the gods happy, and the way to do that is by bringing more and more and more to the altar to keep the gods happy, because the gods were finicky. The gods were hungry. You kept the gods happy because you were afraid of wrath, but you also kept the gods happy because you wanted blessing. You want good things, pay it to the gods. You don't want bad things, pay to the gods. But not only were you doing that, it also formed the way that they viewed the gods. They viewed that these gods, they were hungry and moody. Even if you read in some of the old depictions of what these gods were like, the assumption was like, well, they're easily manipulated as long as you do enough for them, and they're definitely moody. But in the Hebrew Bible, we discover that even if the gods are moody, and even if the gods are picky, these other gods, these other forces in the world, that the one true God, the one that is actually a God, is not like that. Yahweh, Jehovah, depending on the Lord, is not picky. The Lord is not hungry and finicky. The Lord is not operating the same way that all of the other gods operate. So what is the deal with the sacrifices then? Now, when you open up in the book of Leviticus, if you open up to each of the beginnings of the chapters, one of the things you'll notice is that when it starts talking about the offerings, you don't get a whole lot of theology. I think that, like, once we get to the New Testament, we start talking about the significance of the sacrifices because we get to Jesus and stuff. But in the Old Testament, look how the book starts. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you are to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance of the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. You are to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. So somehow by burning this animal, you're good now. But how does it make you good? Text doesn't explain. Why does it make you good? Text doesn't explain. What Leviticus does is it explains what you're supposed to do, but it doesn't explain any of the why. Look at the second chapter, in chapter 2. When anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, their offering is to be of the finest flour. They are to pour olive oil on it, put incense on it, and take it to Aaron's sons and priests. Nowhere does it explain why we're bringing grains to the altar. I think in the past, I always would have to turn to commentaries to be like, hey, why are they doing this again? What's the difference between all of these? Chapter 3, if your offering is a fellowship offering, and you offer an animal from the herd, whether male or female, you are to present before the Lord an animal without defect. And then it goes on where you put the kidneys and where the fat from around the liver goes and all the things on the altar. But it doesn't explain at all why. And the reason is because for thousands of years, humans already knew why. Humans knew, well, the gods are angry. The gods are picky. The gods, you can't really trust the gods. And so we have to bring offerings. We have to bring offerings to them. And so obviously this group of people that came out from dominance under Pharaoh, who came from the places where Chemosh and where Moloch and where Asherah reigned, those people were like, okay, well, so how do we do the sacrifice thing? And it begs the question, if Yahweh is not hungry and Yahweh is not moody, who are these sacrifices for? It's not like God is waiting up there and being like, as long as you have enough barbecue for me, then we can be good because I'm hungry. It's not like God is like, I just need to see some blood. Like if I can see enough blood, see enough things dying, then we'll be good. But once you know the character of Yahweh, you're like, wait a second, that's not how it actually works. That's how the other gods work. But, so who are these sacrifices for? Who are these sacrifices helping? See, even if you go through the rest of the Old Testament, in the book of Amos, just in case you don't believe me, if you think that God still wants the sacrifices, Amos 5, verse 21 says this, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings again and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. In other words, God's like, hey, you know those offerings that you keep bringing me to make me happy? I don't want them. They're not for me. In the book of Micah, he says this, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down to the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Am I supposed to bring lots and lots of sacrifices to God? The next verse, by the way, says, he's shown you what he wants, human. To love, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. In other words, I don't need your sacrifices. I don't need stuff to die. I just want you to live rightly. And to add insult to injury and make people kind of confused about thousands of years of history in the book of Hebrews, this kind of sums it all up. In Hebrews 10:4, it says this, it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. You can imagine like if someone could like fast forward from Leviticus to Hebrews, they'd be like, hey, that would have been really good to know. Like 3,000 years ago, it would have been super cool to know that the blood of bulls and goats can't take away sins because we lost a lot of goats in the process, right? But the reason, remember, the altar is not for God. The altar was for us. Which is why when God, in the first 5 chapters of the book of Leviticus, lays out exactly how you are supposed to do your offerings, what he's doing is he's saying, you know that like all the questions and all the uncertainty that was like built around this thing where you're like, okay, well, I need to bring more to keep him happy, and I need to bring more so that I don't get cursed, and I need to bring more so that I can have blessings. Instead, what you have is you have a God that says, here's exactly what you do. You take this type of animal, you do this exact thing, and then when you do that thing, we're good. Done. Taken care of. You don't have to ask the question anymore, is God mad at me? Can you just believe we're good now? Which is why a few thousand years later, a couple thousand years later, you hear him saying, hey, it wasn't about the bulls and the goats anyway. I needed you to know that we could be good. Now, all of this is ancient history, and you might be like, okay, so like, wait, what does that have to do with me? I think we're a lot more like ancient Canaanites than we think. So many of us walk around this world with deep anxiety, wondering, am I okay? Are they mad at me? Is God okay with me? Like, am I doing this right? Like, is there something more I'm supposed to give? Is there something more I'm supposed to lay down and offer up to God? Like, am I walking through the steps correctly? Am I jumping through the hoops properly? And the book of Leviticus is the very beginning of the story that says, it's not about the hoops. I want you to know that we can have peace with each other. That's what the fellowship offering is called. It's in Hebrew, it's called the shalomim. Everyone say shalomim. It means you can have peace with God and enjoy a meal with him because you know you're good. The offerings weren't so that God could muster up enough forgiveness for us. The offerings were for us to believe that God could forgive us, that he could atone for our sins, that he could take care of the debts that we've accrued in his eyes, that we could be good. That's who the sacrifices were for. Now, in addition to that, the other thing that you'll see in the book of Leviticus is not only a way to make sure that people could take care of their anxieties before God, to make sure that they can know that they're good with God and that they're okay, but also there's a whole lot of law in there and a whole lot of, like, how do we view certain types of bodily fluids and how do we view certain types of foods that we eat? How do we deal this way when it comes to our interactions with other people? There's a whole chapter on different ways people shouldn't have sex with each other. There's all sorts of wild things in the book of Leviticus, essentially saying, hey, here's how to human again. And I say, here's how to human again, because what were the Israelites doing for 400 years prior to the book of Leviticus? Does anybody know what they were busy doing? They were slaves. And when you're slaves, not only does it put your body in prison, but when you're slaves, it changes the way that you view reality. It changes the way that you view that humans ought to interact with each other. It changes everything. Not only do you view Pharaoh kind of like this God figure that's supposed to be like watching out for everybody, so you obviously have to serve him, but additionally, well, your motivations for how to do life is just whatever your master says. Your motivations for what to do, like when you wake up in the morning, is how to avoid the whip so that you can continue staying alive with you and your family. And what you see through the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, through these three things, is a form of brainwashing that God is doing. Now you might be like, okay, guy, like brainwashing, that sounds like dark government type of stuff. Like they're trying to, God's trying to control and manipulate the minds of the Israelites. But it's not that type of brainwashing. If you can imagine and turn this word brainwashing into something positive, imagine your brain is filled with filth. Imagine, like it probably isn't, right? These are jokes. Imagine your brain is filled with filth. We as human beings are in desperate need of brainwashing. And the Israelites especially, they had all sorts of patterns that were stuck in their brains, which is why every time they came across something difficult, they wouldn't just be like, man, this is really hard. They would say, I wish we were back in Egypt. Even though I was a slave, at least I had food. Even though I was a slave, at least I was taken care of. I wish I could be back in Egypt. And what God needs to do systematically over the course of those 3 books, over the course of 40 years, in fact, is do a sort of nationwide brainwashing, cleansing them from the years of slavery, cleansing their outlook and perspective from these false views of what power and love and life ought to look like. And this is what we see in the Levitical law. And what you see over and over again as he gives these laws is he repeats and repeats and repeats, I am Yahweh your God. I am the Lord your God. If you're reading through Leviticus, it kind of starts to get redundant. He'll be like, here's a law, I am the Lord. Here's another law, I am the Lord. Here's another law, I am the Lord your God. And by the way, here's how you should plant your grain, I am the Lord your God. And here's how you should do your sacrifices, I am the Lord your God. And here's how you should treat immigrants, I am the Lord your God. Here's what you should do when you're harvesting the corners of your field, I am the Lord your God. There's this thing about repeating something over and over, and which is why I think that brainwashing is actually a smart word, because not only are they being cleansed, but they're being reprogrammed. Pharaoh is not God. I am the Lord your God. Your comfort that you had when you were slaves is not your God. I am the Lord your God. The pantheon you worshipped in the old country is not your God. I am the Lord your God. And this is how you ought to live. And when he goes through the different ways that people are to live, there's 3 things he does here. And I think if you know these 3 things, when you read the book of Leviticus, I think it kind of unlocks why these rules are so important. Is because the laws that God is giving is reprogramming the way that they're supposed to think about reality. One of the things it's supposed to do is supposed to detox them from their experience of the past. Another thing that these laws do is that it reveals who God is and who they are supposed to be. right? It defines themselves and defines God, and it will distinguish them from the Canaanites. If you live this way, when you get into the land of Canaan, you will be different because they're doing some wild things over there. And so what we need to do is we need to look at the ways that they can be detoxed from Egypt, defined who they are and who God is, and distinguished from the people in Canaan. And I think there's a really great summary right at the top of chapter 18. He says this: "Speak to the Israelites." Actually, sorry, we never stood for the reading of God's word. Let's all stand together as we read this one short passage. I'm going to read other ones, but I think it's good for us to remember that this is God's word. He says this: "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord." You guys can be seated. And you see how all three of those features are there right at the top of Leviticus 18. That don't be like the past, don't be like these people in the future. This is who you are. Live by these laws. And so as far as detoxing, I'm just going to give you some samples, because my goal is that when you go through this week, I would dare you, if you're going to read a chapter, read Leviticus 19. There's a wild smattering of laws in there, and it's a fun challenge to be like, okay, what is God trying to reveal in each of these commands? Leviticus 19, verses 33 through 34 says this: "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." When they were foreigners in Egypt, how were they treated? They were enslaved because they were foreigners. And God says, hey, you remember how you were treated? We don't do that anymore. Remember who you were back then, and you need to detox from that. We're not going to do things the same way. Whenever there is a foreigner who lives among you, you treat them like a native. You treat them like your own. You learn from the mistakes of the past and do not repeat them. I don't think we have to look very far for a practical application to this one in modern society if you want to just take God at his word. Not only do we need to detox, but God defines some things for his people. Some of these are like the greatest hits that you're familiar with. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Now, like some of these things, you're like, whoa, God, like wouldn't even think that people would be like wanting to curse deaf people, because you get why people would do that, yes? Because they can't hear it, yes? And so wanting to say mean things to people who can't hear it, or put stuff in front of blind people so that they can trip. Now, maybe you've known a few young junior high boys who maybe like would laugh at this type of thing. But the fact that this has to make it in the Bible, has to make it in the rules for Leviticus, is God saying, we are not that type of people. I don't know if any of your families do this, but like there is in a sense, especially in honor culture, I do think that there is something to, like, this is what it means to be my child. We are not the type of family that does this or that. In the Seals household, I don't know if this is with your household, some of you guys probably have different rules, but one of the things that is important to us in our family is if you are a Seals, you do not lie and you do not keep secrets. This is a thing. And Trudy and Seji know that this is what it means to be a member of this household. It's not what we do. Even surprise birthday parties are awkward because it's like, I don't know, I want to say something. But this is part of our identity. And what God is doing in the book of Leviticus is saying, I want to mold your identity to know that you're to be the type of people who are so honest who are so straightforward that they don't cheat the people who are working for them. They don't take advantage of the disadvantaged. They are honest with each other. He even goes further. He says, don't pervert justice. Don't show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Don't talk behind other people's backs. Don't do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. What's crazy about the book of Leviticus is I think that a lot of people like to throw these things out because they're in the book of Leviticus. But imagine if we were the type of people that reflected this type of God. Honesty, justice, not showing favoritism, right? Calling people out to their face instead of talking behind their back. What if we were the type of community that did not slander each other or tear other people down, but instead loved your neighbor as yourself? We would be a different type of people. We would be defined by the heart of God. And then last, to distinguish us from Canaan, to distinguish the Israelites from the Canaanites. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I'm going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled, so I punished it for its sin. And the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you must keep my decrees and my laws. The native-born and the foreigners residing among you must not do any of these detestable things, for all these things were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became defiled. If you're wondering what all of these things are, if you read through Leviticus 18, it says things like, don't sleep with your aunt, don't sleep with your mom, don't sacrifice your kids as a burnt offering to God. Don't do these wild things that the Canaanites did. You were to be different. Now, those ones are easy, but once you get to chapter 19, you see that God is like, I not only want to make sure that you are morally different, but I want regular reminders in your life so that you can know you are to be different. Things like this. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Any of you in cotton polyester blends today? Watch out. But if you get the heart of this, if we know Leviticus 18 and we know that he's trying to prevent them from being like the Canaanites, you know he even wants the clothes that you wear to remind you that you're different. He even wants the food that you eat when you go through the kosher laws. He wants even your plate of food to remind you that you are to be different. He wants your field to remind you that you are to be different. He wants everything you do to remind you that you are to be formed in your identity in him, not formed by the broader culture. So, all that to say, we as Jesus followers, there is sort of obviously the last thing, which is that there's some things in the book of Leviticus, when we look at Leviticus, you're like, okay, yeah, but there's this thing about shaving the corner of your beard, and I don't want to have like a square beard. So like, can I still shave the corner of my beard? Or like, there's some things about ear piercings, and I'm like, okay, should we be able to pierce our ears or not? And there's stuff in there that you're like, I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to do with this. But if you understand that it is meant to communicate the heart of God and what it looks like to live differently in this world, and then you fast forward to Jesus, then Leviticus makes all the sense in the world. First, the sacrifices weren't for God ever in the first place. The sacrifice was so that we could be right with God, and we can know that we are right with God. And God wanted us to have that message so much that he came to earth himself. And he said, I want you to know that we can be okay. I want you to know that we can have peace with one another. And before he went to the cross, I think we jump straight to the cross and we forget the fact that he lived his entire life trying to show us what it looks like being the type of people who do not reflect the broader culture, who do not reflect the values of evil empires, who do not fall into the same traps that continue to get repeated from Egypt to today. Living according to the kingdom of God gives us a new way of being that started way back in the book of Leviticus, and we can live that reality now. We can know we have peace with God. We can be delivered from the anxiety, and we can walk in a way that changes this world for the better. So let's all pray together, and we'll sing one last song about God's love for us, because I think that's what Leviticus teaches us. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for your love, for your kindness. Thank you for this enigmatic book filled with sacrifice practices of sheep and bulls and doves and all of that sort of thing, to show us that we can have peace with you. And so, God, if there's anyone in this room right now who isn't sure that they can have peace with you, who are still wondering if you are angry, or if you can be manipulated, or if you're moody, God, I pray that right now they would be reminded that they can have peace with you, and they can know that things are good because of what you did on the cross. God, thank you for being willing to demonstrate your love, to convince us that we can be forgiven and we can belong to you. And God, in that belonging to you, God, I pray that you would help us to live the types of lives that reflect your kingdom, that reflect your character, that reflect your care for the poor, your desire for honest communities that love one another, that walk according to their identity in you. And so, God, we ask that as we go about our lives, as we even serve in our community this afternoon, as we hang out with each other, that we would know that we have peace with you. And if there's anyone in this room that doesn't know if they have peace, take a moment right now just to say, God, I want that peace. I want to know that you have forgiven me. I want to know that you love me. So please forgive me, God. Make me yours. Make me your child. Have that conversation with God right now. Because in Leviticus and through Jesus, he's revealed himself to be the type of God that finishes that promise, that forgives you, that makes you his own, calls you child, my son, my daughter.